Good evening and welcome to the Franchise Tag Podcast with me, your host, Freddie Hall, joined once again by James and Johnny, coming back from last week. You weren't with us last week, but you are with us this week. So fantastic to have all three of us here this evening. And what a wonderful weekend of football it was. I did the Monday night show last night with Sky and Adam, which is fantastic, previewing the games over the weekend and talking about the Falcons and Eagles game. My gosh, did we all get it wrong for the Falcons and Eagles? So if you want to go and watch that again, I suppose, then maybe just don't listen to that bit. Maybe we're just talking a little bit rubbish at that point. But I needed Bijan Robinson to go off last night, guys. Like, I needed him to get like 20 plus points in fantasy, and I lost by like 1.5. So I'm feeling pretty negative about fantasy football right now. How do you guys do? Do you guys do okay?
I think it's been a pretty bad week for fantasy, or for the big name fantasy players. A lot of injuries. There's what's going on? What is going on? But I did okay. I've got Marvin Harrison in my team with franchise tag. So I'm feeling pretty happy with that acquisition. I drafted in my other league Christian McCaffrey first overall, and that's I think going back to hurt me a little bit. But we'll see.
You can't be blamed for it though. You can't be blamed for it. My girlfriend did the same thing. She was 101 in hers, and she took Christian McCaffrey. And I was like, you can't like not like take it.
It's the NFL, isn't it? Something like this is it's always going to happen. Injuries, it's part of the game, and that's I think what's happened already this weekend was just showcased how brutal the league is. But I'm sure we'll get onto that in a bit later.
I only have two fantasy teams. I'm a very strict fantasy person. Like I definitely don't have like 7. Like I think it's ridiculous, and I don't particularly like doing that. I'm strictly a 2-team person. I have a redraft and a dynasty, and I literally across them 2 teams have Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and someone else who's also injured across both of them teams. So I've just been like killed by the fantasy gods this week. James, do you play with fantasy? I haven't really asked you that, really, to be fair.
I'm only in one league, to be fair.
Purist, I like it.
Wasn't going to do any, to be fair. I just wasn't feeling it this time around, and sort of Johnny taught me into it. And so far, it's been awful. Absolutely terrible. It's gone nowhere, in no way like I expected it to. Again, I needed big Bijan Robinson game like yourself, and didn't do very well. I needed a big Jalen Hurts game, didn't do very well. AJ Brown was out, so I've replaced him with some. I can't even remember who it was on the bench now, but just players who I thought could have decent seasons. Just like the Keon Coleman, for example, sort of took a punt on him late on, thinking, okay, the Bills haven't got a lot of receiver. He'll do quite well quite early. It hasn't transpired that way. Samuel White for the Raiders at running back. I thought they're going to have lack of options. He'll definitely be the number 1 ball carrier, and it's just been awful.
That's a stinker for the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, the run game for us has been really poor, and just struggling to see how it's going to pick up. But yeah, so fancy. Yeah, I'm just contemplating just not even looking next week and just seeing what happens, and what hoping for the best. But yeah, I'm anticipating a 0-1 win season this time around, I think.
Ignorance is bliss on that front, I suppose. But let's get all kicked off with the show this evening. So we are going to open with what is an obvious topic, obviously, in our headline. And also we announced it yesterday what we were going to open with and base the show around, I suppose. I mean, it's a quarterback show. This show is going to be a quarterback show. Sorry, spoiler alert to anyone who's watching. We are going to be talking about 3 quarterbacks because they're so interesting at the moment within the league. And like Johnny said, it's been a bit of a brutal weekend for the league. And it's even more brutal news for today for Bryce Young, quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. It's been announced today that he is going to be benched for their week 3 game. Has played in the last 2 games, lost 47-10 to open the season to the Saints, and lost 26-3 over the weekend against the LA Chargers. 245 yards, 3 interceptions for the former Alabama quarterback so far this season. Obviously, Andy Dalton, a quarterback we all know. Don't necessarily know if we all know and love, but we all know at least. It's been a torrid time for Bryce Young. It's been a torrid time this whole time. But James, what was your sort of first initial thoughts when this announcement got made public? Today, really. Well, yesterday / into today.
it's really hard to not think fair enough, to be honest, because the play has just been so bad. It feels more dangerous to leave him in. I feel sorry for him, to be fair. I really do feel sorry for him. And I was listening to an interesting thing that sort of came up again on social media from Brady from a couple of years ago. And he was talking about the transition from college into the NFL. And he was saying that colleges used to be programs whereby you go in at the 7th level, you're the 7th quarterback because you're starting out super young, and you learn about how to become a professional. And then eventually you become the number 3, and then eventually you might get to become the number 1. And during that time, you've learned how to learn, you've gone through a playbook, you've gone through different systems and different schemes, you've been taught how to read the opposition. And then when you transition into the NFL, you feel like you've got a good setup and a good foundation to then be able to walk into a new franchise, a new team, and take what you've learned and input it there. And just obviously you've got to learn a new playbook and stuff, but you've sort of been exposed to a lot already. Now you are part of a team at the college level, and that team has to win straight away. So you go in and they may scheme a few things around you based on your skill set as a quarterback or whatever position it might be, like sort of quarterback in this instance. And then you don't really learn a lot else. The scheme fits the quarterback, and they pick and choose who they want for their colleges based on who fits best. So when you go into the NFL, you've got a really diluted idea of what to expect at that level, and it's hard to not see that in Bryce Young at the moment. He looks nervous, he looks uneasy, he doesn't have the same confidence that he had when he was at the college level. And different coaches, different schemes and everything else, that's not going to help. But he feels like somebody who needs stability, and I'm just not too sure where that's going to come from at the moment. And this is why you have a veteran. You have a veteran to teach a young quarterback and to try and help guide them and give them some level of, again, maybe that stability. But these guys are still professionals. They still want to play. Despite Andy Dalton knowing where his career is at the moment, he still thinks that he can go out there and win games. And so he must be, you can't expect him to just sit there and purely be a mentor. So I think it's the right thing to do in the short term. But if you're so adamant that this guy is the future, he needs games. So it's a really difficult thing to do. It sort of feels like a double-edged sword. You're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't at the moment.
Yeah, it's certainly feeling that way. I mean, this guy's a former number 1 pick, Johnny, isn't he? I mean, he went 2-14 last season, 287 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. It wasn't pretty viewing last year either. Obviously, under Frank Reich for most of the season, then he was fired, and Chris Tabor came and replaced him. Obviously, brought in new coach Dave Canales, the former Bucs OC, to be the head coach this year. And I mean, man, on the face of it now, they gave up King's ransom. Obviously, they traded with the Bears up to that number 1 spot. In reality, they got Bryce Young, but what in reality the Bears got was DJ Moore, a 23rd first round pick, which turns into Darnell Wright, a 2023 second round pick, which turned into the cornerback Tyreek Stevenson. This year's number 1 pick, which obviously turned into Caleb Williams, even though that seems a bit shaky to begin with, it's still Caleb Williams. I feel like we feel confident that he is going to be a success in this league. And then they've got next year's draft second pick as well. I mean, and at this rate, that could be the 33rd pick, which basically feels like a first round pick, doesn't it? I mean, how much of a miss is this by the Carolina Panthers? Because there was worries about him coming out of college, but I don't think there was this big a worry, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you both make really interesting points. I'm not a huge college follower. I obviously watch games, but the assessment of players deep into the rounds. I'm not aware of those type of players until really into the draft process. So there's always a huge I suppose circled around one or two players in each draft who are going to be there or thereabouts, and Bryce Young was, most people that we saw had him as the number one overall pick. Some people who are probably brave enough to say that they had CJ Stroud over him, but I'm sure that they didn't have Bryce Young lower than perhaps the third or fourth pick. So it's a real miss from everyone, really, because Bryce Young, obviously as talented as we saw him at Alabama, really hasn't worked out. He's a quarterback that's, I think, just overwhelmed by the NFL experience. I don't think we've seen Bryce Young feel comfortable. He's obviously not making those plays. I mean, this weekend, his stat line from this weekend, he completed 18 passes for 84 yards. I mean, that's surely impossible. Like, how I just couldn't believe how this guy, they've added some weapons this year. Okay, when we're not talking about elite players, but it just seems unable to take a risk or do a deep ball, and when he does try that, obviously we saw him with his last play, sort of jump pass on fourth down, which resulted in which was an awful play. I mean, it's for the sake of business and Carolina. Unfortunately, Dave Canales is already fighting for his job and he's losing his locker room, as we saw with Adam Thielen's outburst on the sidelines, and apparent discontent with his young quarterback. So he had to make this change. He seems a very positive guy to the Canales, particularly from his time at Tampa Bay, and I suppose that atmosphere and team morale is a huge thing for him. Hence why we've seen a change so early. But Bryce Young is probably looking worse than he did. Obviously the bar's very low from last year, but he's already looking like he's regressing. It's unless something drastic changes.
But surely, Johnny, some of the blame has to go on the organisation.
Of course,
like surely, because I do feel like it has been very much Bryce Young's just not it. And I would argue that this is exactly what the Carolina Panthers brand has been under David Tepper. Very trigger happy, very keen to move on if it's not working out and going right for him. Not patient. I mean, they've done it with head coaches. They've done it with other quarterbacks. They're doing it to another young quarterback again. I know it was a bit of a quarterback circus before Bryce Young turned up, but the Panthers have got to take some responsibility as an organisation here, surely.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, we've talked a lot about not, supporting your quarterback, and clearly the Panthers roster was totally inadequate last year. Full defensive line, which really hampered Young's development. They obviously gave up their number one and probably only asset in terms of offensive weapon in DJ Moore in the trade they gave up. But, this year they've made, I suppose you can say, upgrades with Deontay Johnson, who I'm sure you'll say is a very underrated receiver. Unfortunately, he's not made a difference. Johnson, they brought in a couple of rookie receivers, tried to bolster their offensive line, and I don't know, they look worse this year. And I think Bryce Young has to take some of the blame, obviously, but the Panthers organization from the very top really does stink a little bit. And we've seen that last year in outbursts from the owner. Obviously the fans are very unhappy. I think the entire roster, like I've said, the squad morale is so low. Dave Canales, like I said, I think is a guy who I think people will draw to him, because he seems to be a guy that really feeds off that positive energy, team morale agenda. And I think he had to make this change. Andy Dalton came out today and was absolutely pumped that he had been named the starting quarterback. Despite his age, being given this one last chance. Maybe that's a little boost to the team and for the head coach. And they clearly weren't going to get that from Bryce Young, who, like I say, I think he's just totally overwhelmed. I'm praying that this isn't his last hoorah, but certainly I think he's going to be done in Carolina. I don't know what they're going to be able to get back for him, but he's surely going to be on the trade block. I think as we enter the rest of the season. It's just an awful situation for Carolina fans, and I think they are looking much worse. And the bar is incredibly low than they were last year, and that's obviously something that we don't want to see.
It's crazy because we're going to later talk about another callback at another team, and it'd be quite hilarious for if I suppose to give too much away, but if something happens with Tua, the Dolphins could be a team that may go in for Bryce Young, might they? I mean, at this point though, it's feeling like his career might turn into being a second stringer unless an opportunity comes along. Players like Mariota have had that opportunity. Minshew have had that opportunity to be that number one at other organizations. I hope that Bryce Young can sort of revitalize himself to be able to, if Panthers doesn't work out, he could maybe go and compete for a starting job somewhere else. So it would be good to see him do that, I think. Let's go to the next quarterback on the agenda, though, and that is our former Jet, funnily enough, while you're here, Johnny, and that is Sam Darnold, because James, he is immensely impressed in Minnesota so far. Obviously, they beat the San Francisco 49ers 23-17 over the weekend. Obviously, won their opening game 28-6 against, which is an incredibly poor New York Giants, admittedly. But yeah, 476 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on the year. Has had been a bit of a carousel guy. Was obviously drafted by the Jets. Went over to Carolina. Was backing up in San Francisco last year as well. He obviously was going to be. I think he was going to be the starter this year over JJ McCarthy. Well, it was looking like we didn't really get to that conversation, did we, of the quarterback controversy, I suppose. But there was question marks over which one was going to start. But how much has Sam Darnold impressed you after persevering? After talking about one quarterback that may need to persevere through the league for a few years, talking about a quarterback who has persevered through the league.
Yeah, and this is the thing, if you sort of want to make this transition between the two guys, obviously Darnold really struggled when he was at Carolina briefly as well. And so maybe there is something there to say that this is more of a slightly poisoned franchise than it is necessarily a QB problem.
There's organisational problems across the league. Johnny, surely you're going to have to retort on that in a moment, I suppose. I'll give you your moment.
But what I would say is, if you're looking at Bryce Young, clearly that getting yourself into the right situation can make a massive difference. That's what Sam Darnold needed. It's what other quarterbacks that we've seen move around before have managed to achieve as well. So yeah, that perseverance might be right, but yeah, Darnold has looked massively impressive, and to the point where nobody obviously really expected. It's some people were sort of talking about this mild rejuvenation under the Vikings, and it felt like obviously when JJ McCarthy went down that this is make or break for him now, and so far he has just taken the reins with both hands and sort of just played out of his mind. He's completed 72% of his passes for 476 yards. A funny stat that I saw the other day was that over the 2 games, 20.4% of his total passing yards came from that 97-yard touchdown to throw to Justin Jefferson. So that's one way to give yourself a nice little boost. But I mean, he started 58 games across 7 years now with 40. I mean, I think he's been in the league in these 7 years. That's mad. But I know one of those teams, which was in 2019 with the Jets, he's won more than 4 of the games that he started. So there's still some way to go here. This is the beginning of the journey, but looking really solid after 2 games. I think the presence of Josh McCown in the backroom staff can't be underestimated either. I think he's just seems to be giving Darnold that confidence boost that he never has had anywhere else. And obviously that experience that he's had could be a massive part of why he feels more confident with certain plays than he perhaps did in the past. I think, obviously he's got one of, if not the best wide receivers in the game to throw to, and he's got weapons that are not currently available that are yet to come back in, the likes of TJ Hawkinson, for example, who will be a massive boost. Great play from him behind a probably slightly underestimated offensive line. Not too much talk was being mentioned with them to begin with. They've got a solid defense, but it's all led by Darnold, and he's looking like a player reborn.
I mean, you're saying about coaching as well, though. Do you think that, the Shanahan effect as well of him being at the 49? I know very briefly, but learning from Shanahan as well must have influenced it a little bit, James.
It can't hurt.
I mean, he is pretty much the king of quarterbacks.
If you think now, like if the 49ers had no quarterbacks all of a sudden and Bryce Young was the only option for them, you would feel pretty confident that Bryce Young would step into a 49ers Shanahan system and do well. So, there is a massive amount to be put into the coaching and what is done on the, off the field, behind the scenes, the stuff that we don't get to see. And having the time with somebody like Shanahan and having just that brief exposure to the way that coach works, that the organization works, the way that he gets his quarterbacks to learn his scheme, it can only have stood Darnold in good stead moving on. And hopefully he's brought things over with him that have helped him transition when he moved to Minnesota, and it's just got him on this what seemed at one time to be like an impossible role.
Johnny, you obviously know Sam Darnold incredibly well, and I always feel like you've spoken quite highly of him, though, like quite positive. I always felt like you felt like he didn't get a good shake of it at the New York Jets, and there was probably more that they could have got out of him, and that he could probably do more somewhere else. But obviously, the fitting into the right team has been maybe the problem for him as well. But does it please you that he seems to be succeeding, is actually showing that's showing the NFL world that this is why I was such a hot prospect out of college, and maybe it has been more about organization and the shopping, the changing, and he's gone to an organization that the Vikings are been quite solid. I know they had a coaching change in recent years, but they've been quite a solid organization for a long time, and he's sort of landed on his feet with what is a good head coach, which is a solid defense, not a great defense, but a pretty decent one. Like James said, the best wide receiver in the NFL by some people stretching the imagination, a decent running back in Aaron Jones, an underrated offensive line as well. Some good complementary pieces like Hawkinson, Addison. I know Hawkinson hasn't played yet, but Addison's been a bit in and out as well. But how are you feeling about the whole Darnold situation here?
Yeah, I think I speak for probably most Jets fans that we're very happy, or I wouldn't say maybe not very happy, but I think we're pleased that Sam Darnold is finally coming good. He certainly showed glimpses while he was in New York, but it just goes back to dysfunctional organizations, or drafting a quarterback that the head coach maybe not necessarily wants, just instills a poor trust relationship, which ultimately impacts how they're going to play. And I think your point about Bryce Young going, if he was to come into a Shanahan offense and do well, I think is incredibly accurate. I think, Sam Darnold has obviously had the time to develop, read the game, and has been, supported by, I would say, decent organisations. In talking about the 49ers and the Vikings to, go out there and perform. And yeah, going back to Bryce Young, I think he obviously got the example of Darnold and Baker Mayfield, two former Panthers quarterbacks who are now the two frontrunners for the MVP, or very obviously very early days. But yeah, I've been very impressed with him. Had a really good game on Sunday. Obviously, the Jefferson touchdown, that pass was, I think, the highlight.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy that Darnold's doing very well. I think I'm not going to say that I wanted him to stay, but I was very much in the cautious camp in terms of going all in on Zach Wilson, getting rid of Sam Darnold, and starting a complete rebuild again. I think he has, he's got the stature. He's a big guy, a good arm, and I think if you build around him, he's going to make for a very good player in this league. I think next year it's going to be a really interesting discussion if he continues this form as to where he ends up. Obviously, he's meant to be a bit of a stopgap at Minnesota with JJ McCarthy. Seemingly the long-term plan. But if he can take the Vikings to obviously with they're 2-0, their divisional rivals haven't started in perfect fashion. They could be eyeing up a potential unlikely division charge and potential playoff run. What do you do with Sam Darnold? Do you let him walk, or do you keep him around? It's another one that's going to be very interesting if he can continue it. And I'm very all for Sam Darnold continuing this form. Wish him well for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think he's a player, but I've always sort of coveted. I like to. I didn't. It was sort of around that time when I was getting more into drafts and more into college and more into. Well, I'm not like crazy into college, but like knowing a bit more about people, and he was one of them first drafts for me. So I've always sort of wanted him to do well, and I've always thought like he's got the size and he's got that stability. He's got a bit like that Josh Allen build in a way, and it's just always fell a little bit short and a little bit unlucky for him in most organizations. It was never going to work with him and Baker in the Carolina Panthers setup. That just felt like it was always going to be tragic. And then you always knew he was going to be backing up at the 49ers. Part of me did think that, if Purdy went down and he started for an extended period of time, that there would be a potential that he would maybe take Purdy's spot. I mean, the one person who's probably not happy about the situation at all is JJ McCarthy, who's probably sat at home thinking, God, they're seeing that 97-yard throw being thrown, thinking, gosh, this might be me out of a job pretty quickly if I'm not careful. So I'm sure, I think the Vikings are going to give him a fair shake of it. But, if they get into the playoffs with Darnold by the time it comes around, and if they have a good playoff run, that conversation is going to have to be held. Are we going to stick with Darnold? He took us to the playoffs, or are they going to review it that it was more of a team thing? But at the same time, quarterback position is such a unique position to have in the NFL. It's going to be one that it's going to be under a lot of scrutiny if he does really well. I mean, it's what's funny is that at this point, they've got the Buccaneers and the Saints are 2-0, which we never thought they'd be like the Vikings, Buccaneers, Saints. And I think there's also another team in the NFC for 2-0, but I can't quite find it at the minute. In fact, no, there's only 4 teams that are 2-0, and they're 3 of them, I believe. And they're actually playing 2-0 team in Texans this weekend, which obviously that's going to be a great QB matchup in Sam Darnold and CJ Stroud. That's going to be a load of fun. But yeah, I mean, this division, we said Detroit, we're going to run away with it. And just, Jordan Love goes down, but then Malik Willis looks okay. I mean, the Vikings now have put themselves in real stead for hopefully, trying to keep it improve on that. I mean, the Texans is going to be, as I was about to say, it's going to be their biggest matchup. But I mean, the 49ers really was that biggest matchup, wasn't it? They just played really well against them. So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see him moving forward, and hopefully he keeps that up and keeps the Vikings competitive for the rest of the season. Let's move on to the Tua problem. The Tua problem that we all know about. And that is obviously another concussion for Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, which is now his 4th concussion in 6 years, which he got against the Bills in that Thursday night football game. Obviously, that was a fair few days ago now. but it's still very relevant because there's not a lot of information out there at the minute of what's going forward with this Johnny. This is the third since he's been in the NFL. And it's worrying times. I mean, the questions have been bandied around about potential retirement, if the NFL should be stepping in. What's your take on all this stuff with Tua over in Miami?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult, and obviously wish Tua the full recovery. I think this has obviously hampered his career, and despite getting a long-term contract this offseason, there have been, I think, question marks over his longevity and whether he is the franchise quarterback for the Dolphins. He obviously doesn't intend to retire. That's his decision. He wants to make his career work. We've got to consider the human and health aspects here. And like you say, he's had multiple major concussions now. I don't think we know the full outcome of the one that he suffered against the Bills and how long he's going to be out for. But he should be out for a long period of time because he missed I think a few games last year and certainly a lot more the year before. So to suffer major concussions in 3 separate seasons is going to do some really serious long-term damage. I think that's not no medical background, but that's just what history tells you, unfortunately. I think there has to be a point, and obviously there are a lot of calls from certain former players, former NFL doctors who say he should retire. It's whether or not the NFL gets involved. I can't see that happening. Unfortunately, it's a sad reality. We're all praying for that Tua makes a full recovery and can continue his career. But concussions are such a difficult, brain health, such a difficult topic that he's obviously going to be getting advice and a treatment from the best possible medical experts. But I'd be very concerned if Tua was from a purely human aspect. If Tua was my brother, my son, my dad, and watching him go out in the field and consistently pick up these sort of injuries, it must be such a worrying thing for his family. And I think ultimately it's going to be Tua's decision whether he retires. And I think the human aspect of it will obviously be what it comes down to. But wish him all the best and hope he makes a full recovery. But it's really worrying signs for Tua, and another concussion incident in the NFL. There obviously needs to be more conversations about what more we can do. I can't remember the exact name of what the helmets that they use in training camp, but whether that's an option for actual games to potentially minimize or reduce the impact that these players are going through, because the NFL is a sport like no other, and the NFL just has to do a lot more on this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've seen James Daniels, the offensive guard for the Steelers. He has sort of a cover over his helmet now, which I don't know what that is about, but maybe it's potentially something to do with that. James, what a great thing that his coach McDaniel said of was we're not talking about retirement, we're talking about the human being here. We're talking about his health first, and that's we're not worried about any sort of gossip of retirement or anything like that. It's about the player that's under the helmet and the person in there. But it does boil down that football is a physical game. It is a physical game, and these things will happen. The problem is the consistency of these things happening to one, to a particular individual. Concussions, I'm sure, are a lot more frequent than maybe we are led to believe in the NFL. I don't know about the frequency within individual players, but I think the rate of them is higher than they probably than teams announced and they let on. So is this cause for? Could they and should they, with the NFL, get involved in this and be sort of this mitigating party with Miami and with Tua about the future? Because for them, I mean, with the rate of how talk is with CTE now, which is such a huge topic, and also such a relevant topic for all sports athletes, let alone NFL players. Is there responsibility by the sort of the board of NFL, the overseeing body of it, to be involved in this?
Well, you would think that there is, but it's whether or not they want to be involved, whether they want to leave these massive decisions up to the teams and up to the individuals. If we go back and we sort of think about the injuries that he's had, so week 3 versus the Bills in 2022, we got a hit from Matt Milano, fell back, hit his head on the ground, and that was deemed a non-concussion. We went through the protocols and it was deemed he was fine. The very next week, week 4 versus the Bengals, same thing happened, tackled, head hit the ground, and that's where we had the real sort of major concern, where the hands spasmed and he looked to be in a bad way. He got one on Christmas Day. I think it was week 16 against the Packers, again hitting his head on the ground after a tackle. And it's not just everybody thinks it's going to be that helmet to helmet contact. It's not. When you're being thrown around, there's so many different ways. You think these surfaces aren't all grass. There isn't the same amount of give in the artificial surfaces, if any of them have been done on them. I think 1 or 2 have. And so the league has to, at some point, think about stepping in and saying, okay, we really need to review what's going on here, because we can't have somebody having the worst that could happen on the field. A freak incident like the Damar Hamlin thing a few years ago, there's nothing you can do about that because there's no prior warning. You can't see that coming. This is something that builds an accumulation of trauma over the time. And this is the thing with concussions. Usually it's not just one impact, it's an accumulation of hits. And then, so the biggest hit to begin with might seemingly do nothing, but the 3rd or 4th blow, which seems smaller later on, that can be as significant, if not more impactful than the others, because that is the trigger blow. And you also have to think about susceptibility of individuals. Not everyone is built the same. Not everyone can take the same. You think about combat sports, for example, like boxing, boxers saying to each other, oh, he's got a better or worse chin than this guy. Well, if you're judging it on people's ability to take a powerful blow to the head, surely guys in the NFL are the same. Okay, they've got that level of protection now in the helmet, but if you are susceptible in any way to this sort of injury, then that's only going to get worse over time. And as Johnny said, if you're any sort of relation to Tua as well, and if these organizations talk really well about these players, about how much they love them and how much they invest in them and everything else, if you really care, at some point you are going to have to sit down and say, look, we need to have a conversation here about whether you can carry on, because one more blow and he could be left with a major life-changing injury. And
I don't mean to sound callous, but there is that monetary thing as well. Like I'm sorry, I know it's kind of sad, but this is for them guys a business, as well. And maybe even Miami are looking at this now and going, from a monetary side, it was a 4-year extension with 212 million, 167 guaranteed. I have got an article, just in case we need to refer to anything, via the Morning Star of America, published by Weston Blessing, if that is what I'm pronouncing it. But I may refer to if we get on to sort of what they can do and what they can't do. But that is a factor, James. Unfortunately, it is, isn't it? For this,
of course,
for the organisation as well.
Yeah. You would like to think it's not going to be the biggest factor, but it's definitely going to be there, and the conversations are going to be had. And it is unfortunate, but it is a business as well. Now, and the other thing that, again, going back, if you're Tua and your Tua's family and everything else, you'd be saying, you're probably pretty much set for life. And if you get out now, you can continue working in the sport in other capacities. You could go into coaching, you could go into punditry, you can move in different areas. You take one more hit and suddenly you sound, like boxers sound punch drunk, or you end up in a worse situation like a Muhammad Ali or something of that nature further down the line. You're not going to be able to do anything that you love with the game. You're just going to sit and unfortunately have to watch life pass you by. And it makes you think about other players where they should have stepped in earlier as well. I mean, he never had the same level of supposed or reported injuries, but somebody like Antonio Brown, I think Antonio Brown and Tua Tagovailoa are wired very differently anyway.
Very different people, I think, yeah.
But at the same time, you can't. We would be slightly amiss to just completely disregard what's happened to somebody like Antonio Brown and not wonder if massive impacts, trauma and stuff that he's taken, probable concussions, haven't impacted his character in some way and the way that he functions day to day, and the questionable decisions that he makes, and so again, I think you've got to be wired in a slightly different way to go that way anyway, and that's not Tua. He seems like a really pretty level-headed, down-to-earth, very nice kind of guy. You don't hear a lot about him. He's not a very flashy, showy kind of quarterback. He's, most off seasons you just see him going about his work, and he seems pretty content. So hopefully the right decisions will be made. But yeah, the NFL is going to have to, if it's not already having serious conversations about what if, because if Tua comes back in a couple of weeks' time, when he really, in all likelihood, shouldn't be, and suffers.
I mean, man, if he doesn't come back this week, he won't come back this weekend, I don't think. But if he comes back next weekend, and then in 3 or 4 weeks it happens again, gee, Johnny, that's NFL's worst case scenario, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, of course it is. So, I can't remember what the concussion protocols are, but talking from I'm someone who's suffered concussion playing.
It says here that to be medically cleared for game action, the head injury must complete a 5-step protocol, medical evaluated by team doctors and independent neurologists. But the decision whether or not to return to the field is up to the player and his own doctor.
Yeah. There has to be stronger laws on concussion. I was about to say I've suffered concussions playing sports, and if you suffer one, it was a month off. Even if you were, I suppose, medically cleared that you weren't, you weren't carrying a concussion after a certain amount of time, the coach wouldn't play you, or you were told not to, be active. And that's talking from the very basic of amateur sport. We're talking about the biggest humans making the biggest contacts in probably one of the most physical sports in the world. Surely there has to be stronger laws, a stronger baseline, that it's not up to the players now. This is you can't come back until you've passed 4 games or however long, because whether or not you've made a speedy recovery or whatever, there's always the chance that you're going to re-injure yourselves. And like I say, there's no second chance, I don't think, with brain health and concussions. You're only going to be doing more damage if you come back. And I really want to see Tua come back, but it's got to be done to the safest means necessary. And the NFL has to strengthen its laws on concussions. Whether or not it will, unfortunately, this is a sport where it's all about making money, which is the really sad thing about it. But concussions is something I think as a collective, as pundits, we all think very we have very strong beliefs about it. And how many more of these types of injuries is it going to take for the NFL to strengthen its laws, and like James says, it's about franchises who say they care about their star players being able to step up and make the decisions for the players to say no, you're even if you're medically cleared, we're not playing you this week.
Yeah, it's certainly something we're going to have to keep an eye on in the future for Tua Tagovailoa. So we are obviously over here wishing him all the best of luck in his future, and hopefully this all gets cleared out very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, James. Thank you, Johnny, for joining me this evening. I know it feels like we've sort of ended on a bit of a somber note, but I promise you there was more joyful topics throughout this podcast. Go on, James.
I've got something interesting then for you if you want to end on a slightly more strange note. So imagine if you wind the clock back 3 or 4 years and somebody tells you that this is going to happen in 2024. So in 2024, Derek Carr is statistically the best passer in the league, 76.9% completion percentage, 443 yards, 5 touchdowns, 142.4 passer rating. Gardner Minshew has the highest completion percentage at 77.5. The longest touchdown of the season is thrown by Sam Darnold at 97 yards. Baker Mayfield is undefeated and just behind Derek Carr statistically, and Kyler Murray threw for a perfect 158 passer rating game against the Rams at the weekend. That would have seemed a crazy, unbelievable time 3 or 4 years ago. That would have been a parallel universe kind of stat line, and I feel like that's a better way to pick things up than.
We just need the Jets to win the Super Bowl now, and then I think that's that line.
Let's not end it on a sour note. All right, let's not end it out.
We've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous in 3. I'm only kidding, mate. I'm only kidding.
James, Johnny, thank you very much. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel and all of our stuff on socials. This show gets clipped up for more bite-sized pieces on the YouTube, wherever you want to listen to any of the free topics we've covered tonight in more of an individual facet, that will be there for you. We have the college show coming this week, as well as the Thursday night football preview with 2 special guests with Sky. And we'll also have our betting show at the weekend as well for all those guys with itchy fingers and money to spend. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you all again very